The very moment I stepped out of the prison gates, a fleet of over a dozen ultra-luxury supercars was already lined up across the entrance. Hundreds of loyal brothers instantly dropped to their knees in unison upon catching sight of me. Boss Long, they respectfully swung open the door of the leading Rolls-Royce, begging me to return to the underworld and reclaim total control of the syndicate. I simply turned my back on them and walked away, leaving behind one final declaration. From this day forward, the river crossing dragon is permanently dead. Exactly 15 years ago, I stood alone on the riverbank wielding nothing but a solitary blade, single-handedly holding off a 1,000-man army while my enemy's blood stained half the river crimson. The entire underworld revered me, crowning me with the legendary title of the River Crossing Dragon. But everything shifted when my pregnant girlfriend came to visit me behind bars, tearfully announcing that I was officially going to become a father. Because of my brutal, blood-stained criminal record, not a single legitimate company was willing to hire me. Yet I desperately wanted to rebuild a real relationship with the daughter I hadn't seen in 15 years. Right around that time, I overheard my wife venting about how corrupt and despicable the school cafeteria boss was, constantly serving the innocent children completely foul-rotten meat. They filed multiple official complaints, but the authorities completely ignored them. So I set up a street stall directly outside the school gates to sell homemade bento boxes, because my meals were incredibly delicious and extremely budget-friendly. The very second the final bell rang, a massive crowd of students would swarm to buy my food. However, my daughter Nuonuo wasn't exactly the sweet, innocent girl I had envisioned in my dreams. Despite her tender age, she had already dyed her hair vibrant colors, sported flashy ear piercings, and ran wild with a notorious clique of mean girls. The exact instant her eyes locked onto me, her toxic friends burst into a barrage of condescending mocking giggles. "Hey, isn't that your absolute loser of a jailbird ex-con dad?" I remained completely silent, refusing to utter a single syllable. One of her red-haired friends aggressively sneered at me. "Hey, uncle. Rumor has it you were trying to steal scrap metal back in the day, but you accidentally severed a major power grid cable and copped a brutal 15-year prison sentence. How on earth can one single person be that utterly pathetic and unlucky?" Nuonuo was utterly consumed by a wave of intense burning humiliation. She aggressively marched straight up to my face, and through clenched teeth begged me in a desperate whisper, "Can you please stop showing up here and completely ruining my life? You're making me look utterly pathetic and losing me all my social status in front of my crew." I calmly extended a fresh hot bento box toward her, reassuring her in a gentle voice, "Your mom mentioned you were complaining about the trash cafeteria food. I packed this entire box full of your absolute favorite dishes. Get the hell away from me." Nuonuo violently hurled the hot bento box right back at my chest, splattering it everywhere. Her entire frame was violently trembling with pure, unadulterated rage. As she screamed in my face, "Stop publicly embarrassing me, just stop. Ever since I was a toddler, you've been locked away for such a cowardly, pathetic crime. Forcing me to grow up as a defenseless, fatherless child, getting relentlessly bullied by everyone. Now that I've finally managed to climb the social ladder and find a crew that accepts me, you show up out of nowhere just to drag my reputation straight back into the gutter." That red-haired girl let out a mocking laugh, chiming in, "Hey, old man, have you seriously never considered filing a formal appeal for your case?" My older gang brother literally shattered a guy's legs into jagged pieces and only copped a mere 3-year sentence. Yet you pinched a handful of worthless scrap metal and wasted 15 whole years. This is literally the funniest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. The entire clique burst into another deafening wave of hysterical mocking laughter. The true nature of my blood-stained criminal past is a dark secret I have fiercely guarded and never revealed to my innocent child. She must absolutely never discover that she is the biological daughter of the legendary river-crossing dragon. Otherwise, an endless army of ruthless underworld enemies would hunt her down for bloody vengeance. I calmly wiped the splattered grease and food remnants off my face, stating in a low composed tone, serving time behind bars is absolutely nothing to brag about. You kids should be focusing all your energy on getting a proper education. I pulled out another fresh, beautifully prepared bento box and extended it gently toward Nuonuo. She glared at me, her teeth gnashing in absolute disgust as she hissed, "Having a spineless, pathetic father like you is the absolute biggest, most humiliating curse of my life." Nuonuo violently spun on her heel and bolted away, while her toxic circle of friends let out another chorus of petty giggles, before rushing to catch up with her. But right at that exact high-tension split second, the corrupt school cafeteria boss materialized with a massive squad of hired thugs, aggressively marching straight toward my position with lethal intent. He violently snatched the special bento box I had meticulously prepared for Nuonuo, and brutally smashed it face down onto the dirty concrete floor, destroying it instantly. He thrust his finger directly into my face, screaming, "You absolute son of a bitch. You actually have the absolute audacity to poach my loyal customers and steal my cafeteria's business, huh? Did I not explicitly, crystal clearly warn your pathetic ass before? That if you ever dare to show your ugly face around here selling food again, I would personally execute you on the spot." The entire crowd of onlookers instantly locked their eyes onto the escalating drama, and Nuanua was among them, frozen in shock. I slowly bent down to gather the scattered remnants of the ruined bento box, muttering a quiet submissive, "I am incredibly sorry for the trouble. I will pack up my things and leave the premises immediately." The tyrannical cafeteria boss violently planted his boot straight into my ribs, bellowing in an absolute rage, "Did I not tell you that this was your absolute final warning, you piece of trash?" The sheer kinetic force of his kick sent me tumbling backward into the dirt. The red-haired girl caught the entire brutal assault on camera, turning to Nuonuo in a heartbeat to scoff, "Holy crap, look at your pathetic dad getting completely ragdolled." Nuonuo stared dagger straight at my battered form, her knuckles turning completely white as she clenched her fists in pure frustration. I knew deep down in my soul that she was desperately praying for me to stand up and unleash absolute violence. But I have sworn in sacred oath to never lift my fists in anger again. I looked up and addressed the raging cafeteria boss with absolute humility, saying, "Boss, we both price our combo meals at exactly $15 a piece. I am absolutely not undercutting your market rates. So how can you possibly claim that I am actively stealing your livelihood? These growing children simply desire to consume a healthy, high-quality meal." He let out a chilling, condescending sneer, snapping back. "So what you're implicitly saying is that my cafeteria food is a pile of toxic garbage, huh? Let me take a good hard look at just how magnificent your cooking really is." The enforcer spearheading this aggressive crew was a towering, heavily muscled brute. The absolute second he processed the cafeteria boss's toxic command, he violently gripped the edge of my food stall and completely flipped it upside down. Massive platters of meticulously prepared dishes scattered violently across the concrete, completely drenching my entire clothes and body in grease and food. The corrupt cafeteria boss slowly squatted down to my level, brutally wrapping his fingers into my hair and pulling my head back as he gnashed his teeth, and hissed maliciously, "You absolute piece of trash." A dozen furious parents aggressively filed official complaints, and they still couldn't lay a single finger on my empire. And now a bottom-feeding cockroach like you honestly thinks he can sabotage my operation. Do you have even the slightest concept of how many lethal underworld syndicates I have on speed dial? I maintain my absolute composure, responding with profound humility, "Boss, if the mere existence of my street stall actively offends your vision, I will happily relocate my entire setup far away from this perimeter, alright?" My total unyielding submission instantly triggered an absolute wave of disgust within Nuonuo. She glared at me, her teeth gnashing as she shrieked in pure fury, "You pathetic coward, you are an absolute joke." The exact split second that desperate insult echoed from her lips, her red-haired friend frantically slapped a hand over Nuonuo's mouth to silence her. But the damage was already catastrophically done. The tyrannical cafeteria boss slowly pivoted his head, directing a lethal, bloodthirsty glare straight into Nuonuo's soul, instantly paralyzing her entire clique of fake street friends who fled into the crowd like frightened rats. Not a single one of them possessed the absolute courage to stand by Nuonuo's side. For these amateur wannabe adolescent delinquents, terrorizing defenseless, law-abiding citizens was the absolute peak of their bravado. But the exact moment they crossed paths with genuine, hardened underworld muscle, their manufactured tough guy personas instantly evaporated into pure cowardice. The cafeteria boss let out a chilling sneer, barking, "You think you can just walk away unscathed? It's not that goddamn simple. We need to thoroughly audit the massive financial damages you owe my establishment first. My informants report that you routinely move exactly 300 premium bento boxes every single day, which mathematically equates to you robbing my cafeteria of 300 paying customers daily, at a standard retail rate of $15 per single unit. That equates to a gross loss of $4,500 a day. You have illegally operated this black market stall for exactly 10 consecutive days, bringing your grand total liability to exactly $45,000. Cough up the cash this exact second." I was completely paralyzed by the sheer absurdity. While it was factually accurate that I moved that specific volume of meals, my absolute sole priority was ensuring these growing children consumed high-quality nutrition, meaning I operated on paper-thin margins, prioritizing volume over raw profit lines. My personal net take-home earnings from this grind amounted to a mere fraction. I muttered in a hushed, submissive tone, "Boss Kiao, this calculated extortion of yours is a blatant, tyrannical abuse of power, isn't it?" The cafeteria boss unleashed a deeply mocking, condescending laugh. Pivoting his gaze toward the hulking enforcer to scoff, he single-handedly tanked my profit lines. Yet now the bastard possesses the audacity to refuse full financial restitution. What's the protocol, boys? The heavily muscled brute slowly dropped into a low crouch, scooping up a massive dripping handful of my shredded pork and green peppers straight off the dirty ground. He let out a highly dramatic, mockingly impressed whistle, muttering, "Holy absolute crap. There is literally more premium meat packed into this single portion than actual vegetables. There are literally more shredded meat strips here than green peppers. Running an honest business with this much premium meat Are you genuinely not terrified of absolute karmic retribution, pal? He violently smeared the greasy shredded pork and green peppers directly into my face, brutally slamming my head into the concrete and grinding it back and forth with pure malice. The burning chemical sting of the raw pepper juice seeped straight into my open eyes, forcing me to agonizingly clutch my face with both hands, clenching my jaw in absolute unbroken silence without uttering a single whimper. The massive crowd of students standing on the perimeter witnessed me taking this brutal beating, and their collective teenage adrenaline instantly ignited a wave of righteous fury. That corrupt cafeteria bastard feeds us toxic garbage and has the nerve to violently ban competitors. But damn, this street vendor is an absolute coward. He's completely spineless. If some low-life degenerate ever treated me like that, I would have broken his jaw 5 minutes ago. No cap, if you choose to act like a pathetic submissive loser, you're going to get relentlessly victimized. I aggressively struggled back up into a sitting position, wiping away the blinding burning pepper juice from my eyes. The absolute first visual sight I locked onto upon blinking my eyes open was Nuonuo's face, completely flooded with profound disappointment. She stared down at me, her voice completely hollow as she asked, "Dad, when people are literally executing a violent assault on your body, you genuinely don't possess the absolute courage to strike back anymore, do you?" The tyrannical cafeteria boss spun around, aggressively snapping at Nuonuo with pure impatience. "Listen closely, little girl. What happens here is absolutely none of your goddamn business. If you utter one more solitary syllable of backtalk to me, do you want to bet your life that I can pull a few underworld strings to have you permanently expelled from this school by sunset? Please don't do that, boss. Leave her out of this. Ikekes." I frantically lunged forward and firmly clamped my hand onto the cafeteria boss's forearm, pleading with absolute desperate humility, "I will pack up and evacuate this entire zone immediately. You demanded full financial restitution, correct? I am completely unable to produce that massive lump sum of cash up front. But if you could disclose your exact profit margins to me, I will gladly reimburse you for every single cent of net losses. I am officially taking the loss and folding my hand." The cafeteria boss's expression instantaneously plummeted into a dark, freezing scowl. He aggressively leaned in, positioning his mouth directly against my ear, dropping his cadence into a low, menacing hiss. "Do you honestly take me for a complete brain-dead idiot? Do you genuinely think I would ever expose my top-secret, highly illegal corporate profit margins to a cockroach like you? How the hell am I supposed to continue running my black market monopoly if I leak that classified data?" The second he finished whispering, his burning rage was still nowhere near fully satisfied. He hoisted his hand and violently delivered 2 massive, deafening slaps straight across my face. Nuonuo witnessed me taking those humiliating physical strikes to the face yet again, and completely exploded in pure unadulterated fury, screaming, "Unleash your fists and fight back already, you coward. Just how much longer are you planning to completely drag our family name through the absolute dirt?" The tyrannical cafeteria boss had officially hit his absolute limit with Nuonuo's insubordination. He extended his finger toward her with deep, murderous impatience, barking an executive order to the hulking enforcer standing beside him. "Go handle that situation right now. Drag that uneducated, loudmouth little bitch straight over to my position by her hair." The massive enforcer slowly pivoted on his heel and began aggressively marching straight toward Nuonuo. That red-haired girl was so utterly terrified that she frantically scrambled backward to create massive distance, desperately trying to communicate to the thugs that she possessed absolutely zero affiliation with Nuonuo. An absolute volcanic wave of panic surged through me as I scrambled to my feet, desperately sprinting to intercept the brute. But before I could close the gap, the corrupt cafeteria boss violently grabbed a fistful of my clothes from behind. The garment I was wearing today was merely a standard lightweight civilian dress shirt, and the sheer immense physical force of his sudden yank completely and violently shredded the fabric right down the middle, tearing it completely off my frame. In that exact high-stakes split second, my legendary underworld Yakuza tattoos were completely exposed to the stunned onlookers. The absolute instant my devastating Siddhigarbha tattoo materialized before their eyes, the entire crowd erupted in a collective terrified gasp. Even that hulking enforcer who was aggressively closing in on Nuonuo completely froze, his eyes widening in pure shock, as he stammered out under his breath, "The sovereign of the underworld, Ksitigarbha. Isn't that the legendary Supreme Ink exclusive only to the river-crossing dragon?" The corrupt cafeteria boss, completely plagued by absolute disbelief, extended a trembling hand and aggressively rubbed at the ink etched into my skin, muttering under his breath, "There's no goddamn way. This has got to be a cheap temporary sticker, right?" He violently scrubbed it a few more times, but the dark ink didn't fade or smudge a single millimeter. The absolute split second he realized this legendary masterpiece was fundamentally real, he literally burst out into a loud, mocking, hysterical laughter. "A bottom-feeding street vendor who peddles cheap bento boxes for a living, and you actually possess the suicidal audacity to ink the dragon's sacred Ksitigarbha onto your flesh." The massive enforcer chimed in with deep, sudden paranoia, saying, "Boss, what if this bastard actually is the legendary river crossing dragon?" Word on the streets is that he was officially released from the state penitentiary very recently. The cafeteria boss aggressively rolled his eyes in pure disdain, snapping, "Are you completely brain dead?" The supreme chairman's throne at the multi-billion-dollar Yuanda conglomerate has been kept entirely vacant and waiting for the river crossing dragon's return all these years. Do you honestly believe a legendary underworld god would abandon a global empire just to crawl out here into the dirt and peddle cheap street food to school kids? And furthermore, he cut his own sentence completely in half, abruptly unleashing a brutal, lightning-fast punch straight into my solar plexus. I instantly clutched my stomach, absorbing the entire kinetic force of the impact, while he let out a deeply sadistic mocking chuckle, sneering, "You've got some absolute balls to rock that ink." Back in the day, the river-crossing dragon wielded a solitary blade to single-handedly slaughter 1,000 men. But look at you, you are nothing but a pathetic suicidal piece of garbage. Auntie! He aggressively whipped out his smartphone and snapped a high-resolution photograph of my tattooed back, before declaring with absolute gleeful malice, "You are officially and completely finished, old man." I am forwarding this exact photograph directly to my elite high-ranking contacts inside the Yuanda conglomerate. Their execution squads will be swarming this entire perimeter in a heartbeat. This time around, you are basic 100% certified dead meat. Nwanuo's face turned completely ashen and lifeless as she stared blankly at my bruised form, muttering in despair, "Why? Why on earth did you choose to ink such a dangerous curse onto your body?" I forced a warm, reassuring smile onto my face, whispering gently to her, "Please just go home first." Suddenly, the emotional dam completely broke and Nwanuo burst into a flood of raw tears. She wept hysterically, screaming at the top of her lungs, "You are nothing but a low-life scrap metal thief. Why the hell did you brand your skin with the sacred mark of the Ksiti Garba? Do you have even the absolute slightest concept of how dangerous this is?" Over the last decade, countless underworld scammers tried to claim the dragon's identity to run extortion rackets, and every single one of them was brutally hunted down and systematically erased by the Yuanda conglomerate, Iiso. "You need to run for your absolute life right now." I stared blankly at Nwanuo, completely paralyzed. Is she actually harboring genuine concern for my survival right now? Even though she deeply despises me and views me as a completely pathetic, disappointing father, she still doesn't want to watch my life get brutally extinguished. Witnessing this raw display of her underlying love and concern for me, the crushing weight of absolute guilt inside my soul intensified 1,000 times over. The tyrannical cafeteria boss violently gripped me by the collar, keeping me anchored to the spot. He mockingly shook his head back and forth, sneering, "Don't you dare think about executing an escape." Initially, my sole objective was to deliver a standard, painful physical beating to teach you your place. But who could have possibly anticipated that your pathetic ass was actively begging for a brutal death sentence? Right in the middle of his arrogant boasting, his smartphone suddenly erupted with an aggressive ringtone. He swiped to answer, bellowing in a loud, obnoxious tone, "Hey brother Wei. Ha ha ha, this exact lowlife looks absolutely disheveled and filthy. Because I personally just delivered a brutal physical beating to him. Are you rolling out to the sector right now?" "Wait, hold on a second. What the absolute hell did you just say?" His eyes instantaneously widened to the size of saucers as he stared blankly at my form. He abruptly terminated the call, violently swallowing a massive lump of nervous saliva. As he muttered like a complete idiot, "The entire executive board of the Yuanda conglomerate is mobilizing to this exact location." In a split second, the entire crowd erupted into a chaotic uproar, and the hulking enforcer asked in absolute sheer disbelief, "Do you actually possess personal ties with those legendary elites?" The cafeteria boss stammered back, "High-ranking god-tier power players of that caliber. How on earth could a guy like me ever be connected to them?" But their executive assistant personally called my line just now and declared they are swarming this perimeter immediately. The enforcer let out a highly dramatic sigh of pure awe, exclaiming, "Now that is absolute unyielding underworld loyalty." The mere fact that a bottom feeder is pretending to be their long-lost supreme leader is actually triggering a full-scale tactical deployment of their entire central high command. The cafeteria boss turned back to direct a freezing, murderous glare straight into my soul, snarling, "In my professional opinion, it's because the absolute sacred authority of the river-crossing dragon cannot tolerate any generic random street trash dragging his legendary name through the mud. You absolute inbred son of a bitch. You are about to discover exactly how horrific and agonizing death sentence truly feels." By this point, Nwanuo had completely collapsed into a state of absolute unhinged hysteria, completely disregarding the explicit terrifying threats the cafeteria boss had just leveled against her. She frantically lunged straight to my side and violently shoved my shoulder with all her might. She shrieked through a torrent of raw tears, "Get the hell out of here right now. You've already forced my poor mother to waste 15 grueling years waiting for your ghost, and now you honestly want to force her to become a grieving widow before sunset. Just run already." I stared down at my utterly broken, weeping daughter. and another crushing, agonizing wave of profound guilt violently lacerated my internal soul. This is entirely the fault of my own reckless, degenerate past actions. I am the absolute monster who forced these two innocent women to endure 15 years of pure, unadulterated suffering. Nuonwo turned to the tyrannical cafeteria boss, weeping hysterically as she begged, "Please call off your executioners. Can you just show some mercy? He is literally just a pathetic scrap metal thief who steals copper wires. He has absolutely zero knowledge regarding the legendary myth of the river crossing dragon. Exactly 15 years ago, he was just an uneducated, clueless idiot who severed a power cable and got locked in a cage, back when he was thrown behind concrete bars. The legendary exploits of that supreme underworld godfather hadn't even written their first chapter yet. He didn't intentionally copy the design to run a scam. This whole tattoo situation is a pure cosmic coincidence, a scrap metal thief. The cafeteria boss froze in sheer bewilderment, before instantaneously exploding into a barrage of loud cackling laughter, shouting, "Holy absolute crap, this is killing me," copping a brutal maximum security prison sentence all because you were pinching worthless scrap metal. Is there an absolute story in the history of human civilization that sounds more pathetic and spineless than this? Nuonwo's entire face flushed with a wave of intense burning social humiliation. Yet she still firmly locked her fingers around my hand, desperately exerting all her physical force to drag my body away from the building. But the corrupt boss immediately signaled his crew of enforcers to aggressively step forward, completely barricading our path. He let out a chilling, deeply sadistic sneer, barking, "You think you can just waltz out of my domain that easily? It's not that goddamn simple." The Yuanda conglomerate made their absolute imperial mandate crystal clear a long time ago. Anyone who dares to etch the sacred Xitigarbha tattoo onto their flesh is declaring full-scale open warfare directly against their entire global syndicate. Nuonwo broke down completely, her voice cracking through a fresh wave of tears. "I already told you idiots, he got this ink inked onto his body over a decade ago." The corrupt cafeteria boss let out a deeply sadistic, mocking chuckle, sneering. Whether this pathetic piece of garbage was genuinely caught in a misunderstanding or not is something I absolutely could not care less about. "You absolute son of a bitch, once your life is brutally snuffed out today, make sure you remember in your next reincarnation to never poach another man's livelihood." As my eyes locked onto the terrifying reality of us being completely hemmed in by hostiles, Nuonwo was paralyzed with sheer panic, utterly clueless on how to navigate this death trap. In absolute desperation, she pivoted her gaze toward her core circle of street friends, screaming in complete emotional collapse. "Are you fake bastards seriously just going to stand there and not help us?" The entire squad of juvenile delinquents was too cowardly to utter a single word, until that toxic red-haired girl finally stepped forward and casually shot back. "Who the hell told you that we were actually close friends in the first place, huh?" Nuonwo froze completely, her mind entirely shattered by the sudden betrayal. She stammered in absolute disbelief, "But we literally swore an oath of eternal brotherhood together." The red-haired girl shook her head in deep disgust, scoffing, "If you were truly a loyal sister, you wouldn't be desperately dragging your friends down into the dirt with you during a crisis like this. You've triggered an absolute catastrophe, and now you're trying to leverage our lives as human shields. You don't even possess the absolute right to call yourself one of our crew." The second she broke the ice and initiated the absolute abandonment, the rest of those low-tier street punks and wannabe bad girls immediately joined the pile-on. "No cap, you're literally asking our entire crew to walk straight into a lethal firing squad. Do you seriously have the absolute audacity to bring up our street oath right now? Running wild and playing tough on the block is one thing, but nobody in their right mind is going to throw their life away for a pathetic loser like you. I'm absolutely not committing social suicide by crossing paths with the Yuanda Empire." Nuonwo pleaded in a frantic, suffocating rush of words. "I am absolutely not asking any of you to go to war against the Yuanda conglomerate. I am literally just begging you to help create a brief distraction so we can evacuate, please." Her so-called squad of ride-or-die friends remained completely silent, staring blankly at the dirt. I knew with absolute certainty that at this exact agonizing split second, Nuonwo's entire reality had completely and permanently imploded around her. Yet the dominant emotion surging through my chest was pure agonizing heartbreak, spending 15 years locked in a cage. I knew all too well that Nuonwo must have endured relentless, horrific bullying throughout her childhood. She was simply completely desperate to never be a defenseless victim ever again, which is the sole reason she chose to associate with these bottom-feeding thugs and delinquents, swearing fake blood oaths and organizing a protective street crew, driven by absolute blind panic. Nuonwo desperately attempted to violently break through the dense human wall blocking our escape. But how could her fragile, delicate adolescent frame ever possibly stand a single chance against a squad of hardened adult enforcers? The tyrannical cafeteria boss, losing his absolute patience, hoisted his massive hand and violently unleashed a devastating high-velocity slap aimed straight at Nuonwo's face. Bellowing in pure rage, "Shut your pathetic mouth, you annoying little bitch, and fall in line." But before that brutal physical strike could make a fraction of contact with Nuonuo's cheek, his wrist was violently clamped and locked mid-air in my iron grip. The tyrannical cafeteria boss froze completely in utter bewilderment, stuttering in absolute sheer disbelief. What the hell is this? Don't tell me a pathetic piece of garbage like you actually possesses the balls to strike back at it. I kept my voice low and cold, stating I swore a sacred oath to permanently retire from a life of violence. Don't. He sneered with maximum toxic arrogance. Then unclamp your disgusting hand this exact second. I slowly shook my head, muttering, no matter how much brutal, physical torment you inflict upon my own flesh, I will tolerate it without complaint. But the absolute split second you lay a single finger on my daughter, I will personally end your miserable life. The absolute moment those chilling words echoed into the air, the cafeteria boss instantly lost his composure and burst into a loud, mocking laugh. A bottom-feeding street vendor who peddles cheap food boxes genuinely thinks he can level a lethal threat against me. Alright, you don't want me to physically discipline this disrespectful little bitch, huh? Then I am going to paint a graphic masterpiece of absolute violence on her face right before your very eyes. Even though his dominant wrist was still completely immobilized within my iron vice-like grip, he aggressively cocked his leg back and launched a heavy vicious kick aimed straight at Nuonuo's torso. However, my kinetic reflex speeds operated on an entirely different god tier level. At the exact millisecond, the cafeteria boss began shifting his weight to lift his foot. I executed a lightning-fast, bone-shattering low kick that slammed directly into his supporting leg. His physical equilibrium was instantly and catastrophically obliterated, sending his heavy frame crashing violently onto the dirty concrete floor, in the most humiliating face-first faceplant imaginable. A significant portion of the watching crowd of students couldn't even restrain themselves from bursting into snickers, having his tough guy reputation completely and utterly demolished in public. He frantically scrambled back onto his feet, his face flushed crimson as he screeched at the absolute top of his lungs with unhinged fury. I am going to personally and permanently cripple your pathetic ass right now. I will violently snap every single bone in your arms and legs, before handing your broken corpse over to the Yuanda execution squads, the exact split second that sentence left his mouth. The hulking enforcer spearheaded his entire gang of thugs to charge directly at me. Nuonuo panicked completely, attempting to capitalize on the explosive chaos unfolding within the dense crowd. She wept hysterically, pleading with me, "Dad, we need to run right now." I casually locked my gaze onto the squad of armed thugs charging straight toward my position, letting out a low, weary sigh. I reached out my calloused hand and gently, reassuringly patted Nuonuo on the top of her head, asking in a calm, incredibly gentle tone, "Tell me, do you genuinely revere and idolize the myth of the river-crossing dragon?" She froze completely, her mind entirely paralyzed by the surreal question. I whispered softly into her ear, "Then watch closely, because I am about to show you exactly how a true dragon wages war." The massive muscular enforcer had already crossed the gap, materializing directly in front of my face, hoisting his massive fist to violently unleash a skull-crushing strike aimed straight at my jaw. I didn't even bother to execute a basic defensive evasion. I simply extended a single hand and effortlessly clamped my fingers around his thick wrist like an iron shackle. And no matter how much immense physical force he desperately channeled into his arm, his massive fist was physically incapable of advancing a single millimeter closer to my face. The rest of his gang instantly witnessed their seemingly invincible leader getting completely and effortlessly Yttrion dominated, frantically swarming my position from all angles to initiate a brutal coordinated jump. But I simply braced my core, hoisted the towering 150-pound brute completely off the ground with one arm, and violently hurled his massive body outward like a human missile. The hulking enforcer's flying body crashed like a meteor directly into the oncoming wave of his own lackeys, instantly taking down half a dozen thugs in a single devastating impact. The concrete perimeter instantly echoed with a chorus of agonizing screams and shattered bones. The corrupt cafeteria boss's eyes widened in pure unadulterated panic. He desperately bellowed at the top of his lungs, "Don't just stand there, tear him apart. You possess an absolute advantage in raw numbers. Is it even mathematically possible that a massive squad like you can't brutally overpower a single street vendor?" Nuonuo instantaneously recognized this chaotic window as our absolute best tactical opening, frantically locking her fingers around my wrist to initiate a desperate escape. Yet, my boots remained entirely anchored to the concrete, prompting her to snap in pure panic. "We need to go right now." The second the elite execution squads of the Yuanda conglomerate swarm this perimeter, even if we successfully execute a temporary retreat from this specific zone today, their terrifying intelligence network will relentlessly hunt us down and terrorize our lives forever. It is infinitely more logical to permanently eliminate this entire problem in a single move right here. Nuonuo shrieked in absolute suffocating exasperation, "Stop spewing this delusional, arrogant garbage. Can you just prioritize your own survival for once?" I whispered back with absolute tranquility. I never counterfeited that ink. She froze completely, staring directly into my eyes with a face flooded by deep, unadulterated confusion. I knew with absolute certainty that keeping my god-tier identity under wraps was no longer an option after today. Right at that exact high-stakes crescendo, the heavy atmosphere above was suddenly shattered by a deafening mechanical roar echoing through the clouds. The massive crowd of onlookers pivoted their heads toward the sky in absolute bewildered awe, as a pair of high-end tactical helicopters aggressively cleaved through the air currents, descending directly onto our position. Blazoned across the sleek armored hulls of the aircraft were the four massive gold-plated characters, representing the multi-billion-dollar Yuanda conglomerate empire. The corrupt cafeteria boss was instantaneously pushed into a state of absolute ecstatic euphoria. He extended his finger straight at my chest, shouting with unhinged excitement, "You think you're some kind of invincible martial arts god, huh? Let me break reality down for you. Your life is officially and completely over, old man. The absolute elite enforcers of the Yuanda Empire have officially arrived on site, meaning today marks the absolute final 24 hours your pathetic soul will ever breathe on this earth." The massive crowd of terrified students frantically parted like the Red Sea scrambling to clear the perimeter. Down at the absolute far end of the newly cleared asphalt road, a massive convoy composed entirely of custom Rolls-Royces and heavily armored luxury Maybachs advanced in a precise, intimidating military formation. Nuonuo locked her eyes onto the sheer catastrophic scale of this underworld deployment, and her entire physical frame began violently trembling with absolute primal terror. She let out a suffocated, broken sob, weeping directly at me. My poor mother single-handedly endured the brutal hardships of survival to raise me all alone, faithfully keeping her heart locked for exactly 15 grueling years just waiting for your return. She continuously brainwashed me to never harbor a single drop of hatred toward your absence, constantly swearing that you were actually an incredibly solid, dependable rock of a man. But tell me what the hell is actually dependable about a pathetic loser like you? You've gone out and triggered an absolute death sentence that will destroy our family. I let out a heavy, deeply burdened sigh, whispering, "I am so incredibly sorry." Young. I gently cupped Nuonuo's tear-stained, delicate face between my calloused palms, watching her completely succumb to a wave of pure hysterical heartbreak. And the internal core of my soul felt as though it was being violently lacerated by 1,000 jagged blades. The elite multi-million-dollar armored convoy ground to a synchronized, imposing halt. My legendary brothers, the apex executive board of the underworld, stepped out of the vehicles, marching shoulder to shoulder in a unified, terrifying wall of muscle straight toward my position. The cafeteria boss frantically sprinted like a loyal dog straight to their flanks, exclaiming with unhinged, sycophantic zeal, "Supreme leaders, this is the exact worthless son of a bitch right here." He pointed his finger directly at my face, spit violently flying from his lips as he barked, viciously fabricating the narrative. This bottom-feeding trash has the absolute audacity to counterfeit the sacred mark of the river-crossing dragon. The absolute second I caught wind of his blasphemous corporate disrespect, I couldn't just sit back. I immediately resolved to deliver a brutal, painful lesson to him on behalf of the great Yuanda Empire. But who could have anticipated that this absolute cockroach wouldn't even hold the glorious Yuanda in his eyes? He literally had the suicidal audacity to think he could just walk away scot-free. The massive crowd of student onlookers couldn't contain their sheer electric excitement as the gossip exploded. Holy crap, that is legitimately the actual central high command of the Yuanda conglomerate. Oh my absolute god. Well, this street vendor is guaranteed 100% certified dead meat. Under normal circumstances, regular citizens wouldn't catch a single glimpse of these legendary god-tier tycoons. Yet today, every single one of these mythical underworld titans has actually mobilized and assembled in one spot. This is completely wild. I'm low-key tempted to run over there and beg one of them to be my sugar daddy. Stop begging for a literal death sentence, you complete idiot. Do you honestly think these global syndicate bosses are running some childish street gang, playground game? Well, even that pathetic squad of generic lowlife. Street delinquents who were regularly running amok with Nuonuo on the block were now completely hyperfixated, frantically whipping out their smartphones to record high-definition footage of our impending brutal demise. The absolute fragile weakness of this so-called street loyalty was profoundly tragic to witness, yet simultaneously hilarious in its pathetic execution. In stark contrast to Nuonuo's toxic clout-chasing fair-weather friends, my legendary brothers slowly locked their gazes directly onto my face, and I simply let out a deep, heavily burdened sigh. These men are my ride-or-die absolute blood brothers whose loyalty reaches the heavens. Throughout the entirety of my grueling 15-year prison sentence behind concrete walls, they faithfully held down the empire and waited for my return every single day. Over 5,400 days of absolute unyielding loyalty, solely enduring the grind to wait for the day I stepped back out into the light, just so they could hand the keys of the entire multi-billion-dollar empire straight back to me. Initially, my master plan was to permanently ghost them to protect my daughter from the underworld. But who could have predicted that destiny would orchestrate our reunion today? And furthermore, under such an incredibly volatile and bizarre set of circumstances, as they slowly advanced closer to my position. The cafeteria boss eagerly tagged along, desperately chasing clout and brown-nosed credit as he bragged. To aggressively defend the sacred, pristine honor of the supreme Yuanda conglomerate just now, I literally risked my entire life to deliver a brutal, relentless physical beating to this bastard. Just look at how utterly disheveled, battered, and pathetic he appears right now. I am the absolute mastermind who personally, systematically broke him down like this. Nuo witnessed this terrifying wall of suit-clad killers aggressively closing in on me, and her entire psyche shattered into pure panic as she stammered out in a trembling voice, "Supreme CEOs! Please just open your ears and let me explain the situation. This man, he is actually my biological father. He was thrown behind maximum security bars a very, very long time ago. And that specific tattoo was already permanently etched into his skin over a decade ago. Ever since he was officially released, because I deeply despised the fact that he was an ex-convict, I completely refused to ever be in his presence or associate with him. Which is the sole reason today marks the absolute first time I've ever laid eyes on his back ink, If I had possessed even a shred of prior knowledge regarding this tattoo, I swear to God I would have aggressively warned him about the horrific consequences. Nuo's voice shook with an escalating, suffocating wave of primal terror. Yet, despite her entire body trembling, she still courageously positioned herself as a human shield directly in front of me. Through deep, agonizing sobs, she pleaded. My mother genuinely wasted the absolute prime of her life waiting for his return. He never harbored the slightest intention of offending the supreme Yuanda Empire, nor did he ever possess the delusional thought of counterfeiting the identity of the river-crossing dragon. I am literally begging you all, please just spare his life. I will drop down onto my knees for you right now. And just like that, Nuo actually fell to her knees. Solely to protect a pathetic father like me, she dropped straight onto the cold concrete weeping hysterically. The sheer suffocating heartbreak made it physically impossible for me to even draw a single breath. I would have infinitely preferred her to look down on me with intense burning disgust for the rest of my days, rather than witness her swallow all her pride, exposing this raw vulnerability, all because of a father who failed her for 15 long years. The corrupt cafeteria boss let out a booming, arrogant laugh, mocking, "Wow, she actually dropped to the dirt." But I am genuinely so incredibly amused right now. Who the absolute hell do you think you are in the grand scheme of things, huh? How many measly dollars do you honestly think your pathetic knees are worth? The exact millisecond that toxic sentence left his mouth, the entire executive board of the Yuanda conglomerate simultaneously dropped straight down onto their knees. None of them dared to look directly into Nuo's eyes. In a single split second, every single onlooker in the entire perimeter was completely petrified in utter jaw-dropping shock. The elite tycoons roared in perfect thunderous unison, echoing, "Welcome back, Lord Dragon greetings, young miss. This sudden catastrophic plot twist left Nuo entirely paralyzed, her mind completely blank. Perhaps to a regular street kid like her, the multi-billion-dollar Yuanda conglomerate was a god-tier corporate empire that they wouldn't even possess the absolute courage to glance at under normal circumstances. Yet now those exact mythical rulers were kneeling in the dirt, pledging their absolute loyalty directly to her. Nuo slowly pivoted her head around, her eyes completely flooded with deep, unadulterated confusion. It was mathematically impossible for her to comprehend how her pathetic scrap metal stealing father had suddenly executed a god-tier transformation into the absolute ruler of the underworld. The cafeteria boss's face instantaneously turned completely pale, drained of all blood. He let out a horrified, high-pitched shriek, stammering, "Supreme CEOs! Is it mathematically possible that you've got the wrong individual? This bastard is literally just a bottom-feeding street vendor who peddles cheap food boxes." The absolute instant that sentence left his lips, the elite executive enforcers violently tackled him, pinning his face directly against the hard concrete. Their eyes flushed with a murderous crimson tint as they roared with unhinged fury. Today officially marks the absolute final 24 hours your pathetic soul will ever breathe on this earth. The cafeteria boss panicked, completely screaming at the top of his lungs. "It's a misunderstanding. I swear to God, this entire situation is a massive misunderstanding." I calmly walked over to Nuo's side and gently took her arms to hoist her back up to her feet. The exact moment Nuo stood tall, the legendary executive board members remained completely anchored to the dirt in a kneeling position, as long as I didn't issue an official verbal command. Not a single one of those terrifying underworld gods possessed the absolute courage to move a single millimeter. Nuo swallowed a massive lump of nervous saliva, stuttering out like a complete idiot, Am I genuinely the biological daughter of the legendary river-crossing dragon?" I looked into her eyes, murmuring softly, "I'm so incredibly sorry for keeping you in the dark for all these years." Her eyes widened to the size of saucers as she stared at me, asking, 15 years ago, did you genuinely wield a solitary blade to single-handedly slaughter 1,000 men? And is that legendary myth about your blades painting half the river crimson actually 100% real?" How on earth can a single mortal warrior successfully stand against an army of 1,000 men? I locked eyes with her and smiled, saying every single word of it is absolutely factual. Just give me a brief moment to permanently resolve this pathetic cockroach and I will narrate the entire epic to you. I cast a freezing razor-sharp glance over at the trembling cafeteria boss, and my legendary blood brothers instantly deciphered the absolute meaning behind my unspoken command. They immediately seized his collar and began aggressively dragging his pathetic frame straight toward my boots. The cafeteria boss was completely and utterly paralyzed with a level of pure unadulterated terror. He let out a series of high-pitched hysterical shrieks for salvation, offering absolutely zero physical resistance as he was dragged across the dirty concrete like a discarded carcass. Meanwhile, that hulking muscular enforcer was completely traumatized into a state of vegetative shock. The exact same brute who was radiating pure violent malice just a mere few minutes ago felt his entire muscular frame completely collapse as his legs dissolved into useless jelly, frantically trying to stay beneath the radar and quietly vanish back into the dense crowd. However, the sheer velocity of his survival instinct was entirely choked out by his own paralyzing fear. Perhaps his criminal rap sheet was packed to the brim with horrific acts of violence, and perhaps he had survived a multitude of chaotic blood-soaked street skirmishes in his prime. But there are certain absolute entities in this dark world that exist on a tier infinitely more terrifying than any street-level nightmare he had ever navigated. Entities like the absolute god-tier weight of my name. The absolute millisecond his brain registered the true identity behind my face. His entire psychological courage was permanently shattered into a million pieces when a human being is pushed into a state of absolute maxed out psychological dread. The severe neurological collapse that paralyzes your own legs becomes entirely impossible to override. Even though his brain was desperately screaming at him to flee for his life, the strength in his lower limbs continued to rapidly deteriorate to absolute zero, until his massive frame finally lost the battle against gravity and crashed straight onto his knees in the dirt. He began frantically and violently punching his own useless thighs, begging his own paralyzed muscles to somehow summon the strength to stand back up. But his desperate efforts were completely futile, standing in the absolute crushing shadow of my presence. His primitive subconscious had completely stripped away any remaining psychological courage required to look me in the eye. My lethal enforcers effortlessly materialized beside him and locked his arms, violently dragging his massive body across the concrete straight toward my position. And right alongside him, they systematically rounded up every single one of his pathetic lackeys. My eyes casually drifted over, locking directly onto that toxic red-haired girl, as I casually muttered to my men, while you're at it, fetch that pathetic squad over here as well. The exact same individual who was relentlessly hurling toxic insults at our family just moments ago. That arrogant red-haired girl instantly froze, her face entirely blanked out by the sudden reality check. Her entire complexion instantaneously shifted into a ghostly white hue of pure unadulterated panic, before her primitive brain could even formulate a basic comprehension of her impending doom. The massive surrounding crowd of students back up in pure terror, creating a massive empty buffer zone. Initially, her pathetic squad thought they could easily camouflage themselves within the dense sea of bodies, but under the absolute undisputed authority commanded by the name of the river-crossing dragon, absolutely nobody in their right mind was willing to court death by association, keeping their eyes locked firmly onto the dirt, their entire bodies violently trembling as they walked step by step toward my position. The absolute moment their boots came to a halting stop directly before my looming shadow. The red-haired girl's voice cracked into a pathetic weeping whimper as she stammered, "Mister?" I swear to God, I didn't mean to mock your authority just now. Please, it was just a joke. It was honestly just a harmless joke. Nuonuo, come on, we're literally ride or die besties. You will have to help us out and put in a good word for us right now. Nuonuo fired back with a bone-chilling icy glare. Who the hell ever said we were besties? Rehashing their absolute betrayal. Nuonuo practically ground her teeth in sheer unadulterated fury. Just a second ago, I was literally begging you spineless cowards to give me a hand. Yet you chose to ruthlessly mock me and throw me to the wolves. And now you have the absolute audacity to claim you're my loyal sisters. I've officially seen through the fake toxic masks of every single one of you. One of my top-tier syndicate brothers stepped up to my flank, bowing his head in deep reverence as he inquired, "Lord Dragon, how exactly do you want us to systematically execute the punishment for these cockroaches?" My gaze slowly drifted down onto the terrified cafeteria boss, causing his entire physical frame to violently convulse with primal dread. He dissolved into a pathetic weeping mess, stammering, "Lord Dragon." No wait, Boss Dragon. Chairman Dragon, sir. I swear to God I had absolutely zero knowledge regarding your legendary identity. If I had possessed even a fraction of prior warning, even if you handed me 100 times more raw courage than I have, I would have never ever dared to cross paths or mess with you. I slowly marched straight up to his trembling form, casting an imposing god-tier glare down upon his pathetic face. The psychological pressure suffocated the man completely, to the point where his trousers suddenly began expanding with a dark damp stain. The absolute coward had literally pissed himself out of sheer terror. I let out a heavy sigh, stating calmly, I never had any intention of poaching your livelihood. The retail price of our food boxes is mathematically identical. If the students choose to purchase their meals from your establishment, they get the absolute luxury of sitting down comfortably indoors to enjoy their food. But when they choose to spend their hard-earned cash on my stall, yo schultz. Forget about having a solid roof over their heads to shield them from the elements, seeing. I don't even possess a single table or chair for them to utilize. They are literally forced to march all the way outside the school gates. And they have no choice but to awkwardly squat on the dirty curb just to eat. So tell me, why on earth did they still choose me over you? The cafeteria boss swallowed a massive suffocating lump of saliva, stammering out in a broken, trembling voice, but because I'm a greedy, corrupt scumbag. Because I am an absolute subhuman piece of garbage. I was completely wrong. I swear I genuinely realize my mistake now. I cut him off coldly. You don't feel a single shred of genuine remorse. You're simply paralyzed by the sudden realization that you've crossed an apex predator you can't survive. This pathetic verbal apology is nothing more than a desperate attempt to escape absolute retribution. One of my executive brothers walked over to the shattered remains of my humble food cart, asking in a low, dangerous tone, Lord Dragon systematically moves 300 lunchboxes a day? Did you violently vandalize this merchandise, or did you legally purchase the entire inventory? The cafeteria boss frantically shrieked, I bought it. I legally bought it all. I saw how incredibly hard Lord Dragon was working, so I deliberately purchased the whole stock out of respect. I leveled my gaze at him, asking coldly, then do I still need to financially compensate you for your medical bills? The terrified cafeteria boss remained completely glued to the dirt on his knees, stammering out in a frantic, shaking voice, Oh, of course not. Absolutely not. Well, It was entirely my own blind ignorance that failed to recognize a literal titan. Please, a supreme ruler like you shouldn't descend to hold a grudge against a worthless maggot like me. I let out a cold smirk and said, well, since you claim you legally purchased the entire inventory, it only makes logistical sense that you sit down and consume every single bite of it right now. His entire brain completely short-circuited, staring blankly at the massive mountain-like heap of trampled food scattered across the filthy pavement, muttering in absolute petrified shock, consume all of this. One of my executive brothers unleashed a thunderous, terrifying roar. Are you implying Lord Dragon's personal cooking isn't worthy of your disgusting mouth? I'll eat it. I will violently gorge myself on it this exact second. The cafeteria boss frantically scrambled like a desperate animal over to the pile of ruined food, prostrating himself flat on the concrete exactly like a loyal, pathetic dog, shoving massive, desperate handfuls of the dirty, pavement-shoveled food straight into his mouth. I cast a sideways glance down at him, asking casually, how does the culinary craft taste? While frantically choking down the contaminated food, he forced a sycophantic brown-nosed smile, whimpering, It's a masterpiece. Absolutely delicious. The flavor profile is infinitely superior to the toxic garbage I serve inside. Excellent. Then make sure you don't leave a single grain behind. The boss froze in absolute horror, whispering, But this is 300 individual commercial-sized portions of heavy food. Oh, how is it physically or biologically possible for a single human being to finish all of this? The executive board members caught wind of his backtalk and instantly erupted into pure fury. Oh, so you're claiming you can't finish it? Don't worry, we are more than happy to provide some aggressive physical assistance. The boss's skull was violently grabbed and slammed face first straight into the mountainous pile of dirty food, forcing him to hysterically, painfully suffocate as he choked down the concrete-covered debris. I calmly pivoted my gaze over toward the hulking enforcer and his remaining squad of thugs, casually tossing out a question. Are you spineless cowards just going to stand there and not help your boss finish his meal? With nothing more than that solitary low-toned sentence. My ride-or-die brothers instantly deciphered the absolute gravity of my underlying intent. They aggressively dragged the entire squad of thugs over to the cafeteria boss's side, violently shoving every single one of their skulls face first straight into the dirty concrete food pile. An executive brother loomed over them, stating in a bone-chilling, icy tone, Gorge yourselves, boys. Make sure your bellies are completely full before you embark on your absolute final journey. That single nonchalantly delivered sentence instantly sent a wave of paralyzing existential dread through the cafeteria boss and his crew, making them screech, Supreme leaders. What absolute journey are you talking about? An executive stepped forward, whispering, The Uanda conglomerate owns an overseas mining operation. But due to the extreme local warfare, brutal combat, and lethal malaria outbreaks in that sector, the body count of laborers dying in the trenches is astronomically high. If the cosmic dice roll in your favor and your luck is exceptionally high, you might simply lose a couple of functional limbs or an arm, and survive a grueling 10-year sentence of manual labor before you're legally allowed to return. But if your cosmic luck happens to run entirely dry, the absolute best case scenario is that we eventually ship your incinerated ashes back home in a cardboard box. The cafeteria boss and the massive enforcer process the terrifying reality of their sentence, instantly dissolving into an absolute weeping mess of tears as they begged, "Please God, is there any way we can skip this?" So, of course you possess the absolute right to refuse the assignment right now. But the global apparatus of the Yuanda conglomerate will make your daily lives such a living hell that you will literally beg on your knees to go. The cafeteria boss completely lost his mind to absolute unadulterated panic. He frantically shuffled forward on his bare knees across the rough pavement straight toward my boots, weeping hysterically as he shrieked, "Big brother, my ultimate savior. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry for my sins, I genuinely know my place now. I am begging you, on my hands and knees, please don't let them exile me to those overseas trenches. I've caught wind of the horrific rumors regarding the conglomerate's lawless foreign mine sites, the poor laborers deployed out there. Either get their entire lower torsos completely pulverized by improvised explosives, or get their limbs brutally hacked off by the bloodthirsty local warlords and militia factions. The corporate charter explicitly stated that those operations only utilize local foreign labor. So how on earth can you legally deport a domestic citizen like me to that meat grinder? I am a flesh and blood human being, too damn it. I merely committed a single minor lapse in judgment. There is absolutely zero systemic justification to subject me to such extreme retribution. I let out a cold, sharp chuckle and remarked, "I've been informed that the school principal happens to be your biological cousin. Your corrupt establishment has been officially reported by outraged parents multiple times, yet every single investigation miraculously dissolved, leaving you completely untouched. Furthermore, those parents were entirely within their legal rights, simply protecting their children's basic health. But the absolute second they dared to blow the whistle on your toxic operations, their innocent kids were instantaneously slapped with malicious, retaliatory expulsions. Care to explain if that digital paper trail is accurate?" He swallowed a massive suffocating lump of nervous saliva, muttering in a pathetic defensive whisper, Well, you can honestly blame their own pathetic academic performance for that outcome. They failed to qualify for a subsidized public institution, so enrolling in an elite private academy and inciting a riot is just begging for trouble, right?" I narrowed my eyes, stating coldly, "So based on your primitive worldview, the apex predator possesses the absolute birthright to ruthlessly oppress and exploit the weak. By that exact logical framework, doesn't that mean I possess the absolute right to ruthlessly crush you into the dirt?" Lord Dragon, I abruptly severed the cafeteria boss's pathetic stuttering mid-sentence, extending my hand to heavily, deliberately pat him on his trembling shoulder. I let out a weary, deeply disappointed sigh and muttered, "Those students are in the absolute prime of their physical growth. I completely comprehend that running a commercial business requires maintaining a solid profit margin. But when it comes to feeding developing children, you should possess at least a microscopic shred of human conscience. You are desperately begging me to show you a shred of mercy right now. But did you ever extend a single ounce of mercy to those defenseless kids? If they weren't pushed to the absolute brink of starvation by your inedible garbage, who in their right mind would willingly march outside the secure school perimeter, just to awkwardly squat on the dirty curb to choke down a standard lunchbox? I was completely wrong. The cafeteria boss couldn't even finish formulating his desperate plea before my executive enforcers violently gagged him and dragged his pathetic body into the dark shadows. It operated exactly as my syndicate brothers had coldly laid out. Whether these criminals willingly agreed to board the transport ship or not was entirely irrelevant, because when the dust settled, the terrifying global apparatus of the Yuanda conglomerate would make them scream and beg to be sent to those mines. At this exact terrifying juncture, that entire squad of toxic clout-chasing street delinquents who used to roll with Nuanuo were completely paralyzed, their entire physical frames violently convulsing with raw primordial terror. The arrogant red-haired girl dissolved into a hysterical mess of tears, weeping, "Mr. Please. We swear on our lives we will never ever dare to mock or disrespect your authority again." I calmly extended my arm, running my fingers through her dyed, disheveled red hair. Before stating in a low, incredibly tranquil voice, "I never harbored any intention of wasting my energy to punish children like you. I simply want to impart a single piece of absolute reality upon your minds. Focus your energy entirely on your education, and stop idolizing this utterly worthless toxic street gang culture that yields absolutely nothing of value. Forming cringy schoolyard syndicates and constantly picking violent fights, or desperately hunting for older guys to call your honorary brothers. You naive brats honestly think you look so incredibly cool and untouchable right now. But the brutal second you get thrust out into the real unforgiving society, these toxic smooth-brained habits will utterly ruin and destroy your entire future." She completely lost control, trembling violently as tears streamed down her face. I looked at her and said, "The next time you pull up to hang out with my daughter, just make sure you dye your hair back to a normal color first, alright? She let out a suffocated whimper, nodding her head frantically. At this exact heavy millisecond, she completely collapsed under the sheer weight of her internal terror. Her legs dissolving into absolute jelly as she crashed to the pavement, while I simply let out a weary sigh. Turning away from the drama, I calmly began picking up the shattered pieces of my ruined food stall. My absolute baseline objective from day one was to maintain a completely low profile. If these local bottom-feeding thugs hadn't continuously cornered me and forced my hand, I wouldn't have possessed the slightest desire to steal the spotlight or flex my power like this. The moment my elite executive brothers saw me physically doing manual labor, they completely panicked, frantically rushing over in a chaotic scramble to pack up the remaining inventory for me. I cast a curious glance at them and asked, why on earth is everyone so utterly petrified of us? They're literally making the Yuanda conglomerate look like some ruthless, bloodthirsty mafia syndicate. The multi-billionaire board members froze completely, exchanged blank stares, before scratching their heads and muttering in deep confusion, honestly, boss, we have absolutely zero clue. If we had to guess, it's probably because our organization is just so disgustingly, monstrously wealthy. I simply let out a passive grunt of acknowledgement, completely securing the remaining components of the mobile cart, and then gently gestured over toward Nuonuo, signaling for her to fall in line so we could head back home together. Nuonuo quietly trailed closely beside my flank, constantly casting anxious, wide-eyed glances over her shoulder every few seconds, because the entire elite army of suited executive brothers was still marching right behind us, absolutely refusing to break formation or leave my perimeter. I pulled out the solitary, miraculously undamaged lunchbox from the wreck and extended it to her, letting out a soft nostalgic sigh as I muttered, it's honestly such a massive shame. In the original meal I carefully curated for you at dawn, I took the extra time to meticulously arrange the food into the shape of a perfect heart. Nuonuo reached out to take the warm lunchbox from my hands, aggressively wiping away the residual tears staining her cheeks. As she whispered in a shaky tone, I genuinely believed our lives were officially over just now. You seriously should have dropped the bombshell a hell of a lot sooner. That you are literally the mythical, legendary river-crossing dragon himself. I locked my eyes onto her, asking softly, given how absolutely terrified you were, why on earth did you still choose to leap forward and act as a human shield to protect me? She instantly burst into a fresh wave of tears, sobbing, because even if I deeply resent you, for completely vanishing from our lives for 15 grueling, agonizing years, at the end of the day, you are still my biological father, and you are the exact man my mother faithfully waited for every single grueling day and night. A genuine smile broke across my face as I leaned down to gently brush the tears from her cheeks, whispering in a deeply comforting, affectionate tone, for the past 15 years of absence, I have profoundly failed you and let you down as a parent. But from this exact moment onward, I swear to God, I will never ever leave your side again. Eventually, Nuonuo's legs grew completely exhausted from the long march. She wanted to sit down and rest on a concrete milestone by the curb. So I frantically whipped out a tissue to buff and clean the stone surface for her. The exact second she sat down, I immediately began opening her soup container and blowing on it to cool it down, extending the chopsticks to execute every single microtask a dedicated father is capable of doing. Nuonuo gripped the chopsticks tightly, staring up at me as she asked, that legendary myth about you single-handedly conquering 1,000 men? What is the absolute truth behind it? That specific chapter of my life was honestly not a glamorous or glorious affair at all. I locked eyes with Nuonuo, my mind traveling back in time as I reminisced exactly 15 years ago. My loyal brothers and I originally established the foundational roots of the Yuanda conglomerate. We were entirely focused on running an honest, law-abiding, and legitimate commercial enterprise. However, the societal landscape back then wasn't nearly as peaceful and organized as it is today. In those days, ruthless syndicate factions aggressively utilized raw military-grade violence to systematically hijack our lucrative business routes. Every single one of my men intensely loathed their tyrannical oppression, and we desperately wanted to wage an all-out blood-soaked war to eradicate them. But I explicitly told my brothers that they all had loving families to protect. Descending into the mud to engage in a reckless street war with criminal syndicates would only permanently ruin their futures. It was infinitely more logical to cut off the head of the snake by executing the enemy king directly. Nuonuo swallowed a heavy lump of saliva and interrupted, I already know that part. I've overheard the legendary whispers regarding your syndicate's origin story. Your crew was backed entirely into a corner pushed to the absolute limits of human endurance. So to mount a final retaliation, you all drew fatal death straws. And you ultimately pulled the short straw. I looked at Nuonuo with absolute sincerity and nodded, yes. It was precisely that fateful high-stakes game of death straws. Paralyzed by the existential dread that my soul would be permanently damned to hell after my demise, I had the legendary Kshitigarbha Bodhisattva permanently etched across my entire back, solely begging for the absolute divine mercy of the Buddha, just so my soul would be granted the right to reincarnate as a regular human being in the next life. I laid bare every single dark unfiltered detail of that 15-year-old bloodbath to Nuonuo. Before stepping into the arena, I tightly bound layer upon layer of thick heavy sheet metal around my entire torso, because the sheer weight of the armor severely compromised my speed and mobility. I made the tactical choice to completely bury myself alive beneath the sands of the enemy boss's mining quarry, the exact second that tyrannical cartel leader finally materialized, and unluckily walked directly over the top of my hidden position. I violently thrust my blade upward, piercing straight through his lower groin. In the immediate aftermath of that assassination, I was completely forced to stand solo and confront the entire enraged army of 1,000 men stationed inside that quarry. I completely lost count of how many dozens of lethal blade strikes pierced my flesh. To this very day, I am profoundly grateful that I possessed the tactical foresight to wrap myself in so many defensive layers of heavy iron plates. Initially, the enemy soldiers were completely baffled as to why their blades weren't splitting me in half, but once they brutally shredded my outer clothes and witnessed the makeshift armor, realizing I had meticulously strapped those endless sheets of metal together to mimic the structural defense of a legendary medieval knight's full suit of armor, they completely lost their minds to unhinged fury and attempted to mobilize heavy mining trucks to crush me into paste. Fortunately, the police force swarmed the perimeter in the absolute nick of time, and against all cosmic odds, I walked away from that meat grinder alive. From that historical bloodbath onward, the streets permanently branded me as the legendary river-crossing dragon. But that mythic title came at an incredibly steep, agonizing psychological price. I was brutally hit with a devastating 20-year prison sentence. The absolute second those iron gates slammed shut, I genuinely believed my entire life was permanently over, until a miracle occurred and I discovered that a precious new life was about to be brought into this world. I cast an incredibly tender, soft gaze directly into Nuonuo's eyes and murmured, "Solely to transform myself into a respectable father worthy of your existence." I systematically optimized my behavior and pushed for maximum rehabilitation behind bars, securing an early release a whopping 5 years ahead of schedule. All because I absolutely refused to miss the monumental day you officially transitioned into adulthood. Nuonuo swallowed a heavy lump of emotion, her voice cracking as she stammered, But why on earth, during all these grueling years of my childhood, did Mom never drop a single hint or breathe a word of this epic history to me? We were dealing with the most vicious but bloodthirsty syndicate factions imaginable. So how on earth could we possess the reckless courage to speak about it openly? We were perpetually paralyzed by the existential dread that old rivals would track down our location. And across all these long, exhausting years, I explicitly banned my blood brothers from sending a single cent of financial aid to your mother, purely because I couldn't risk anyone uncovering the absolute truth of your biological identity. But now that you've officially returned to the mortal world, why on earth did you still choose to keep me completely in the dark? I casually gestured toward the elite armada of suited power brokers hovering behind us, answering softly, "Do you truly comprehend why after 15 long years of total absence, every single one of these titans still fiercely installs me as their absolute undisputed chairman?" Nuonuo slowly shook her head in complete silence. One of my executive brothers stepped forward, his voice choking with profound, deep-seated grief as he explained. Back in those dark days, Lord Dragon didn't possess any biological children or heirs, whereas the rest of us were completely tethered by aging parents and fragile newborn babies. It wasn't until the heavy prison bars locked him away from society that we finally uncovered the absolute truth. He had completely rigged the fatal death straw lottery. He was the one who originally proposed the high-stakes drought, yet from the absolute millisecond the game was conceived, he had already made the executive decision to sacrifice his own flesh and blood to shield the rest of us. I flashed a highly bittersweet, self-deprecating smile at Nuonuo and sighed. I was completely oblivious to your beautiful existence back then. I was even foolish enough to pen a final heartbreaking letter from my cell, begging your mother to move on and find a respectable man to build a life with. If I had possessed even a fraction of knowledge that she was carrying you in her womb, I swear to God I would have never played the reckless hero. In that fateful year, I technically chose to abandon your mother to walk a path of blood. And it is precisely because of that unforgivable, agonizing guilt that I genuinely felt I lacked the moral right to face you. Alright, that's enough narrative history. The rest of you need to immediately cease tracking my perimeter and stop following us. Any casual onlooker glancing at this crowd would easily mistake me for some ruthless underworld don. The line of multi-billionaire syndicate brothers instantly grew highly anxious and stressed, turning their eyes toward Nuonuo in a desperate pleading appeal, crying out, "Young miss, the sole reason Lord Dragon continuously refuses to reclaim his golden throne at the apex of Yuanda is because his profound loyalty and absolute honor simply transcend standard comprehension. He firmly lives by the code that the bond between true gentlemen should remain as pure and unburdened as water. adamantly rejecting every single ounce of our immense financial compensation and material rewards. 15 long years ago, we were nothing but weak, defenseless peasants relentlessly preyed upon by criminal syndicates, possessing absolutely zero cards to play, entirely relying on his solitary blade to survive. Now, 15 long years later, the absolute tables have completely turned, and it is finally our designated time to unconditionally repay this monumental blood debt. Please, young Miss, reason with Lord Dragon and convince him to rightfully reclaim his throne at the apex of Yuanda. I knit my brows together in deep annoyance, barking, "Every single one of you needs to beat it right now." I never executed that assassination 15 years ago just to plot for some future material compensation. If you genuinely want to honor our history, just stop by my humble street stall and purchase a lunchbox every now and then, and I will consider that more than enough to sustain the eternal flame of our brotherhood. The elite executive board members were left entirely stranded between a rock and a hard place, when Nuonuo suddenly shattered the tension, blurting out, "But wait, what if I actually want to live that rich heiress life?" My entire brain completely short-circuited in absolute disbelief. I quickly recovered, lecturing her. My lengthy time behind bars thoroughly ingrained a profound universal truth into my soul. A human being must keep their feet firmly planted on the ground, utilizing nothing but the honest, grueling sweat of their own two hands to systematically accumulate wealth. Oh, really? Are you seriously trying to imply that when you wielded that lethal blade to launch your bloody retaliation 15 years ago, you were somehow swinging that steel with your bare feet instead of your hands? Ethos. I scoffed, stating that is nothing but a textbook example of manipulative, flawed logic. Nuonuo was pushed to the absolute brink of frustration, shouting, "But I genuinely want to inherit a massive empire, Dad." You languished behind cold prison bars for 15 grueling years, effectively leaving both me and Mom to suffer in absolute crushing poverty for 15 agonizing years. And now, the very titans you saved are begging on their knees to repay their debt with generational wealth. Is it genuinely so criminal to finally let your own daughter experience the luxury of being a rich heiress? Is it truly so wrong to let Mom finally step into her rightful place as an elegant, pampered, high society wife? I fired back, my voice dripping with gravity. This operates on a tier that directly concerns a man's ultimate sense of honor. When a true warrior steps up to shield his blood brothers from annihilation, he can never under any circumstances reduce that sacred act of loyalty into a cheap commercial transaction for cash. She aggressively wiped away a fresh cascade of warm tears streaming down her face, her tone suddenly lacing itself with a dark, deeply rooted layer of resentment as she hissed, "I couldn't care less whether you are a mythical street legend or the god-tier river-crossing dragon. If you stubbornly choose to reject their massive corporate backing right now, I swear to God I will despise and resent you until the absolute day I die. Sacrificing our entire future today just to feed your own massive fragile ego, effectively forcing me and Mom to break our backs working ourselves into an early grave for the rest of our lives." The sheer raw weight of her emotional outburst completely stripped away my ability to articulate a response. I hovered in a state of deep, agonizing hesitation for a prolonged moment, before finally pivoting my body around to face the army of suited executives, muttering, "If your syndicate is genuinely absolutely desperate to repay this ancient debt of mine, is it logistically possible for you to legally buy out that high school cafeteria and hand the entire lease over to me?" The second those multi-billionaire brothers processed my request, they frantically swarmed forward in a chaotic scramble, shouting, "Lord Dragon! Acquiring a single microscopic school cafeteria is an absolute insult to your legendary stature. How about we structure an infinitely superior corporate deal instead?" The global apparatus of the Yuanda conglomerate currently employs a massive workforce of over 20,000 individuals, and our corporate campuses house a grand total of 25 commercial mega cafeterias. We can instantaneously outsource the absolute operational rights of every single one of those establishments directly to you. We will draft up an official legal contract this exact hour, allowing you to immediately seize absolute control of the operations and rake in the immense cash flow, and you don't have to pay a single cent of commercial rent back to the conglomerate until next fiscal year. I immediately waved my hands in absolute protest, shouting, "How on earth is that remotely acceptable? Structuring a contract like that is functionally identical to just handing me a multi-million-dollar business for free." The lead executive let out a warm chuckle, replying, "Lord Dragon, we are family. We're your blood brothers. Why on earth are you splitting hairs over logistics with us?" Every fiber of my being deeply, intensely wanted to reject their massive charity. But looking back at Nuonuo's desperate, tear-filled face, I had no choice but to permanently swallow my fragile masculine pride and stubborn ego, officially signing the contracts to seize absolute operational control over a grand total of 26 mega cafeterias. Deep down, I genuinely, profoundly despise navigating life this way. I firmly believe that true, unadulterated brotherhood operates entirely in the soul, and lowering that sacred bond to demand filthy lucre and financial compensation is fundamentally corrupt. Fast forward exactly one grueling, hyper-lucrative month later. I straight up purchased 2 brand new ultra luxury high-end Porsches. One was immediately handed over to my beautiful wife as her daily commuter, while the other was meticulously iced out and encrusted with custom diamonds for Nuonuo to display as a bedroom ornament. Witnessing the radiant pure beam of absolute happiness flashing across their beautiful faces, I quietly told myself, you know what, screw it, let it go. Protecting, pampering, and elevating your own flesh and blood is infinitely more critical than any abstract ideology. As for a man's arbitrary street respect and pride, if it's gone, and who cares? Nuonuo completely shed her cringy, toxic street delinquent persona and trashy aesthetic, pivoting her entire focus toward hitting the textbooks with absolute, unyielding dedication, causing her academic grade point average to launch into a spectacular, steady upward trajectory. She confidently proclaimed her ultimate goal was to secure admission into a top-tier hospitality and culinary management program, purely so she could seamlessly inherit and systematically scale up our booming family empire in the future. Witnessing my once rebellious daughter completely transform into a disciplined, brilliant young woman sent a profound, incredibly emotional wave of warmth straight through my paternal heart. Meanwhile, hidden away in her bedroom, Nuonuo quietly penned a secret entry inside her private diary. I absolutely loathe and detest that legendary street moniker, the River Crossing Dragon. Once upon a time, I naively believed that this mythic underworld figure was the pinnacle of cool. But the exact millisecond the horrific truth was laid bare, I finally realized the reality. It basically proves that my father used to be a total unmitigated brain-dead idiot back in the day. An absolute world-class clown who willingly threw his entire youth into a concrete cage just to play superhero for others. Dad always lectures me that throwing my life away in the streets makes me a brainless fool. But if you ask me, the older generation consisted of the most incredibly brainless fools to ever walk the earth. How on earth can a human being be so monumentally stupid as to tank a 20-year prison sentence for another man's sins? And the absolute funniest part of this comedy is that such a spectacularly foolish person actually possesses the absolute audacity to sit there and lecture me on how to navigate moral adulthood. However, the silver lining is that he is currently making absolutely disgustingly insane amounts of money now, even though he stubbornly refused to claim his rightful golden throne as the official chairman of the entire corporate board. The raw cash flow he controls is completely out of this world. He easily rakes in multiple millions of pure net profit every single month, all while completely dodging the crushing, soul-sucking operational stress of managing the massive Yuanda conglomerate. Because of that, his schedule is entirely wide open, allowing him to spend endless quality time with us every single day. I have genuinely, profoundly fallen completely in love with having him as my dad now. He even dropped a massive promise that the exact second I celebrate my 18th birthday, he's buying me a custom Ferrari. I am literally absolutely obsessed with him. I was robbed of 15 long agonizing years of essential paternal affection and protection. But fortunately, he currently possesses more than enough astronomical wealth to entirely compensate for our past suffering. I am going to lock in, grind, and master my education with absolute perfection, ensuring that this massive family fortune and legacy remains firmly, securely locked inside my personal hands. My dad is honestly still a massive, soft-hearted fool at his core though. Every single time some washed up, down on their luck former gang brother or distant relative crawls up to our front door, begging, he doesn't hesitate for a single second to blindly wire hundreds of thousands of dollars straight into their pockets. And every single one of those freeloaders naturally never repays a single dime. He is honestly so incredibly dense. He claims that if someone is your true brother, you can't go around harassing them to settle their debts. Otherwise, you completely violate the sacred code of street loyalty. His toxic obsession with honor is seriously going to be the death of us. Mark my words, he'll end up liquidating our entire family fortune one day just to fund his naive principles. That's exactly why I need to hurry up, master this business, and seize absolute control as the rightful heir. Peeking silently at the pages of her private diary from the doorway, I let out a profound, incredibly heavy sigh. My daughter genuinely doesn't inherit a single shred of my personality or worldview, but it's entirely my fault for completely vanishing from her life during those 15 crucial years. She must have endured unspeakable hardships and pain to develop such a fiercely guarded, practical mindset. I swear I will multiply my efforts tenfold to unconditionally make it up to her. From this exact moment onward, I am officially freezing all handouts and shutting down my personal loan service. After all, my own daughter already officially classifies me as a total, unmitigated, brain-dead idiot.